Okay, so we tried to record this earlier in the day when I presented this live at TGIF on Friday, but unfortunately the recording didn't save, so I'm just gonna re-record this for those that missed it. So here we go. So if you don't know me, my name is Braeden Kelly. I'm a fourth year Augustana student and first year student chaplain. And something we do with Augustana chaplaincy is at the end of the year, Craig gives us graduating students a chance to speak at a TGIF, deliver homily, and reflect on faith, life, and learning. So there was a lot of different ways I could take this, but I decided to focus on those three key themes: faith, life, and learning, and how um, those words have changed meanings for me over the course of my degree and how I understand them. So before I start, I always like to preface whenever I share that these are some of my ideas, some of the things that have helped me. These ideas aren't universal truth. They're just some things that I've learned and I want to share with you guys. And I hope this can be a conversation starter and spark dialogue. And I would love to talk more offline about some of this stuff, whether in person or online. You can feel free to shoot me a message if you have further questions. So yeah, so with that, let's get into it. So first of all, faith. And for me, faith over my degree has looked like embracing doubt and the mystery of God. So growing up, I grew up going to St. Albert Alliance Church and I still really love that church. Grew up going there, grew up in a Christian home, grew up going to summer camp, going to youth group, and then eventually became a youth leader, summer camp leader, very much within the sphere of evangelical Christianity. And back in those days, my faith was fairly simple. It was believing this right set of beliefs so that I could be saved and go to heaven when I die. And if you watch my previous TGIF sharing, I told the story of how I've progressed from those views. But along the way, it's been kind of a rocky journey. It's been ups and downs, and more recently, over my university career, there's been more downs than there has been ups. I've started a lot with doubt and questions about God. Things like contradictions between the Bible and science, and contradictions with archaeology, violence in the Old Testament, the problem of suffering and evil in the world, and even this year, especially the problem of other Christians. We've seen this year essentially Christian terrorism and the attack on the Capitol, or if you look back through history, it's littered with Christians doing terrible things in the name of God, colonizing North America, the Crusades, and the list goes on and on. And especially hurtful is seeing Christians being anti-intellectualism or anti-science when it comes to pandemic response or environmental degradation. So that combination of these deep questions about God and the character of God, as well as um, other Christians not showing a good witness to who God is, those caused me a lot of struggle, a lot of doubt over my 4 years, especially here. But so in my first year, I started out in Edmonton at U of A, and I was a science student. So over my first semester, I went to a couple seminars from this one guy, Dennis Lamoureux. He's a professor at the Catholic Adjunct College, St. Joseph's, and he delivers seminars on faith and theology and works to harmonize the two. And so he talks about kind of a spectrum of beliefs and evolutionary creationism. And at first, I thought he was kind of out to lunch, a bit crazy. But as I went to more and more of his talks, I kind of grew in appreciation and um, learned more, and I became open to some of these ideas, and that kind of triggered more and more openness to these deeper questions, and more willingness to ask hard questions and pursue them, because I truly believe that the truth has nothing to be afraid of. It says that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and if that's true, um, then we should pursue truth, and we hopefully will find Jesus at the end of that. And at first, I kind of thought these doubts were bad. I thought they made me less of a Christian, and I thought I needed to do more to kind of explain them away. But over time, as I've matured, I've realized that not only are they not bad, they're at times good and an essential part of my Christian faith, and I think a lot of other people's as well. Um, so I've resonated recently with this Catholic concept of the dark night of the soul, where we kind of shed these images we have of God, these false pretenses, and instead we come away with a more, it can feel like God is absent, but in the end, it's us finding the true God and figuring out that he's more expansive than we think, and we can't just put God in a box. And throughout the biblical narrative, we also see doubt littered throughout. On the cross, Jesus cries out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, or my God, why have you forsaken me? Where he quotes Psalm 22. And throughout the Psalms, you have lots of cases where people doubt. Often they come back with a hopeful note at the end of the Psalm, but that's not always the case. I'm going to read a section from Psalm 88. here right at the end. So this is from Psalm 88. Right at the end, verse 13. But I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning, my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? For my youth I have suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me and have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. That's how that psalm ends. Um, so we see throughout the biblical narrative, um, people struggle with the idea of God and some of the big questions that I've been struggling with. And so that was comforting to see. One story in particular, I have in some artwork on the left here, this leftmost picture that has resonated with me is the story of Jacob wrestling with God. So if you're not familiar, it's in Genesis. So essentially how it goes down is Jacob is sleeping and eventually God comes down to him in the form of a man or an angel. And over the course of the entire night, they wrestle. And as the sun is coming up, Jacob says to God, "Let me go, for day has broken." But instead of letting Jacob go, God reaches down and touches Jacob's hip, injuring it badly. Kind of weird, but that's how he blesses him. But Jacob doesn't give up. He continues to wrestle with God, saying, "I won't give up until you give me a blessing." So God eventually relents and gives Jacob a blessing in the form of a new name, Israel. So Jacob is left with God's blessing, but also a limp. So that idea kind of resonated with me of just like this wrestle with God. And it's not just a 1 day thing, it's over the course of a long period of time. It's extended. It doesn't just go away. There's no easy fix, but through the process, we come away with deeper knowledge of God. And that's a bit of the blessing, but also the limp of trying to think through these deep questions and like, who are we? Where did we come from? What is the purpose of life? What happens when we die? And just to honestly wrestle with those. So I also have this picture in the middle here, more artwork of Mother Teresa. And a couple of years ago, I read this story about her that really resonated with me, of her having similar experiences. So um, let's see, here we go. So in 1975, the Jesuit philosopher John Kavanagh went to work for 3 months at the Home for the Dying in Calcutta, India, with Mother Teresa. He was searching for an answer to his spiritual struggles. On his very first morning there, he met Mother Teresa. "And what can I do for you?" she asked. Kavanagh asked her to pray for him. "What do you want me to pray for?" she asked. He answered with what I'm sure he felt was a perfectly reasonable and humble request. In fact, the very reason for which he traveled thousands of miles to India in the first place. "Pray that I have clarity." "No, I will not do that." Kavanagh asked her. "Why?" "Clarity is the last thing you are clinging to and must let go. But you always seem to have clarity." Mother Teresa laughed. "I have never had clarity. What I've always had is trust. So I pray that you will trust God." That story, I think, is really helpful for me. And it kind of gets back to the Greek root word for faith, which is pistis, which indicates more of a trusting relationship. And I think this is what faith should look like for us. I think it is not necessarily this set of doctrines or this set of beliefs that we cling to. I think it should be trusting God while we explore the deep questions, while we wrestle with God. We trust anyways that He is good. Um, and lastly, the last picture I have on this slide is this one on the right. So it's a pretty famous picture. It's called the Pale Blue Dot. It was taken February 14th, 1990 by the Voyager 1 space probe, and it was taken 6 billion kilometers away. So this little dot here in this speck, this is Earth, taken from a little spacecraft. And I just think that is such a humbling picture. Like, we are so small in comparison to the universe. Um, as well, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and if that was mapped onto a 24-hour day, modern humans have only been around for 1 second of that. So we have this minuscule history on this minuscule planet. If our solar system was a size of a quarter, the Milky Way would be equivalent to North America. And even within individual humans, there's 75 trillion cells. Um, so we live in this incredibly complex universe, and we're such a speck. And that's not even getting into like the multiverse theory and stuff. But it just, when you look at that, you have to think like God is bigger than the boxes we put him in. Um, so I think if that is the God that created all that, I think he can handle a little bit of questioning and a little bit of wrestling. Because I think our concept of God needs some expanding at times. Um, so on to the next slide. So life, and what is the meaning of life? For me, especially as I've been at Augustana, I think a lot of the meaning of life comes back to love. When Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And I truly think that is key to everything. So referencing back to my previous talk at TGIF again, you can watch this on the chaplaincy YouTube if you missed it. Um, but I talked a lot about what does loving God look like? And I think it looks like partnering with God in his mission. And it's not about loving God to get out of earth, but it's about bringing heaven down to earth. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So I included this Haitian hunger toque, which talks about the gospel and all the outworkings in the world. It's a very earthly good news that is actually good news for all people. It's partnering in stuff like what Jesus talked about in Luke 4, which I talked about the other time. And Jesus says in Luke 4, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So I think if we want to love God, we have to love other people and partner with God in his work of restoration and reconciliation for people and for the world around us. Um, and oftentimes that love will look different for different people. But I think a lot of it is also involved with justice and working to bring peace and so that all humans can experience flourishing. And oftentimes that looks like giving up our own privilege and power so that we can create this anti-hierarchical, fully egalitarian society so that all people can have a chance to flourish and experience God's peace on earth. These other pictures I put are some of my friends, from my roommates, and some pictures from the running team. So while I was at Augustana, I just experienced so much community. One of the main reasons I decided to switch was I worked at camp with two good friends of mine, Jenya Rust and Hillary Kemp. Some of you may know them. And I actually got to live with Jenya at her family's old house in my second year. And that was just such a picture of love. We always had people coming in and out, and it really taught me the value of community and kind of this Augustana spirit. And throughout the rest of my degree, I went to countless potlucks, ski races, running races, soup suppers, and it was just ingrained in me of how powerful a community can be. And so I just think that is key to experiencing God, is loving others and loving in community. So I'm just going to read one of my favorite passages on love. It's in 1 John chapter 4. I'm going to start at verse 7. So here we go. "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. This is how we know that we live in him and he in us. He has given us his Spirit, and we have seen and testified that the Father sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment in this world. We are like Jesus. There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not perfect, not made perfect in love. We love because he first loves us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother and sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. I really love that passage. It also kind of reminds me of another one of my favorites, of the parable of the prodigal son, of this loving God, that the perfect love that he has for us has cast out all fear, that no matter who we are and where we are, we can come to him and find healing and community and love and restoration. Um, so I'm going to go to my last slide now. So last one's about learning, seeking wisdom and becoming a lifelong learner. So if you know me at all, you know I'm quite into learning and reading and kind of seeking truth. And so this is one is especially important to me. And so over my degree, I've just kind of found a lot of learning comes down to wisdom. If you had asked me in my previous state of Christianity what the Bible was all about, I would have said it's kind of where we go to learn about God. Maybe I would say the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it, or the Bible is basic instructions before leaving Earth. But now that I've kind of progressed in my faith, I've understand the Bible a little bit differently now. I think the Bible is not those things. The Bible is this collection of ancient literature that can lead us to God and lead us to wisdom. And so, just for example, within the book of Proverbs, which is often considered to be the book of wisdom, right in chapter 26, there's contradictory statements back to back. Proverbs 26, it says, "Do not answer fools according to their folly, or you will be a fool yourself." And right after, "Answer fools according to their folly, or they will be wise in their own eyes." So right there, you can see the Bible is not meant to just be read and just taken at face value. There's a lot of contradictions in the Bible, but I think that's expressing these different opinions, and you need to read it and to be discerning, and it can gain you wisdom. And I think a lot of the life of faith is a pursuit of learning and the pursuit of wisdom. Um, Within Jewish traditions, there's this tradition of the Midrash where um, Hebrew Bible would be read in community, and there would be debates about what it meant. But at the end of the day, it was okay, and they would lead to more wisdom. A lot of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible is a type of literature called Jewish meditation literature, where you need to read it several times and you need to think about it deeply. Um, yeah, so the Bible is ancient, diverse, and ambiguous. It's ancient because if you think about it, King David would have, if he was a real person, existed around 3,000 years ago. If you map that onto modern terms, that would be around 5,000 years if you went 3,000 years from where we are now. So you have to think like people, if they were writing in the year 5,000, they would look a lot different than 2021. And that is the time gap that we're separated from those people, those authors writing back then. It's ambiguous. When people say the Bible is clear, I don't know if I can agree with that anymore. There's 38,000 denominations. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that's confusing and has been interpreted differently throughout history. And it's also diverse. The Bible is written by many authors over thousands of years, sometimes from the perspective of the oppressed, sometimes from the perspective of people in power. And so it's this library of texts. And then, so I put this picture of Jonah on the right. So all of us pretty much know, if we grew up in Christianity, the story of Jonah. It's kind of a classic story. But what many of you may not know is the book of Nahum. So the book of Nahum is one of the minor prophets, and probably you haven't read it. I hadn't before I kind of stumbled upon this. But so the book of Nahum, it talks about, both Jonah and Nahum talk about Nineveh, but Nahum talks about Nineveh being destroyed. Um, and Nineveh and Nahum is happy about this. He thinks that this is God smiting the Ninevites and putting his judgment upon them. And he is interpreting this as the prophets do, as God's judgment. And so Jonah, on the other hand, as many of you probably know, he goes to the Ninevites against his will, and God uses Jonah to allow the Ninevites to experience repentance and reconciliation with God. And so if you look at these two accounts, it's a little bit confusing because they're contradictory, but the Nahum account was written earlier, around 612 BC. And so that Nahum account is based on reality. The Ninevites didn't all reconcile to God. They were smited, they were destroyed. And so that is more of the historical account, but the account of Jonah comes later. It's around 538 BCE. And so we look at this account of Jonah, and you kind of have to think, I mean, he does get swallowed by a big fish for 3 days. That's kind of a little bit of a clue, but you have to think that this is more of a parable and more of taking creative liberties to take this long gone foe to express in a parable form God's expansive mercy for non-Israelites. The author of Jonah is asking the question that maybe God does care about other people, and he uses this fictitious account to express this newfound belief or potentially a hope that maybe God is more inclusive than we have thought him to be. And so, yeah, that is, I think, a prime example of within the Bible, we see these different ideas, but we can also glean wisdom from it. So, lastly, I put this picture of this tree. So this is from one of my favorite artists, Scott Erickson, and I think it's pretty key here. Um, so I think learning is key to being a Christian. I think when we talk about being a disciple of Jesus, the root word of disciple is a student or learner. But I think learning sometimes it means that we have to let go. Um, so this is very fitting for this Easter season. It's this coffin, and then you have this new life coming out, this tree or burning bush. And so I think this represents to me like the death of our old, tired ideas and the allowing ourselves to come up with new ideas and to experience a new vision of who God is, a more expansive, more beautiful vision of God. And that is my hope for myself going forward and for all of you guys watching and listening, that as you go out from here and as you grow and learn more about God, that you would dive deep into this stuff. As our theme is in chaplaincy this year, you would be okay with some old, maybe bad ideas about God dying, but in their place, new ones can arise, new and better and more beautiful ideas of God, and that these can lead you to wisdom, and that this wisdom can help you to love those around you as best you can. So yeah, that's all I had. Thanks for listening.